Chapter 16 of Kabumpo and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. Kabumpo vanquishes the Twigs. "Do you think you were alive before?" asked Kabumpo, squinting down his long trunk at Peg Amy. She had begged him to take off his plush robe and, spreading it on the grass, was beating it briskly with the branch of a tree. "Yes," sighed the wooden doll, pausing with uplifted stick and regarding Kabumpo solemnly. "I must have been alive before, 'cause I keep remembering things." "What kind of things?" asked the Elegant Elephant, rubbing himself lazily against a tree. "Well, this for instance," said Peg, holding up a corner of the purple plush robe. "I once had a dress of it. I'm sure I had a dress of this stuff." "When you were a little doll?" asked Kabumpo curiously. "No," said Peg, giving the robe a few little shakes. "Before that. And I remember this country, too, and the sun and the wind and the sky. If I'd only been alive one day I wouldn't remember them, would I?" "Queer things happen in Oz," said Kabumpo comfortably. "But why bother? You are alive and very jolly. You are traveling with the most elegant elephant in Oz and in the company of a prince. Isn't that enough?" Peg Amy did not reply, but kept on beating the plush robe with determined little thumps and staring off through the trees with a very puzzled expression in her painted blue eyes. They had traveled swiftly all morning through the fertile farmlands of the Winkies and had paused for lunch in this little grove. Peg not needing food, and Kabumpo finding plenty of tender branches handy, had remained together while Wag and the Prince sought more nourishing fare. Many a little Winkie farmer had stared in amazement as Peg and Pompa passed that morning, but so fast did Kabumpo and Wag travel that before the Winkies were half sure of what they had seen, there was nothing but a cloud of dust to wonder over and exclaim about. "If you had a pair of scissors I could cut off the burned part of your robe and make it more tidy," said Peg, when she had finished beating the dust out of Kabumpo's gorgeous blanket. "There might be a pair in my pocket," said the Elegant Elephant. "Here, let me get them," he added hastily. For suppose she should look into the magic mirror, he thought suddenly, it might tell her something terrible. Even in this short time, Kabumpo had grown fond of queer wooden Peg, and careless as he was, somehow he did not want to hurt her feelings again. Sure enough, there was a pair of silver scissors in with the jewels he had tumbled into his pocket before leaving Pumperdink. So Peg carefully cut away all the scorched parts of Kabumpo's robe and pinned under the rough edges with 3 beautiful pearl pins. "Now lift me up into that small tree and I'll drop it over you," she laughed gaily. This Kabumpo did quite easily, and after Peg Amy had smoothed and adjusted the robe, she crept out on the end of the branch and straightened the Elegant Elephant's pearl headdress and brushed all the dust from his forehead with a handful of damp leaves. "You're a good girl, Peg," said Kabumpo, sighing with contentment. "I don't care whether you never were alive before or not. You've more sense than some people who've lived for centuries. I'm going to give that gnome something of my own account. Dared to shake you, did he? Well, wait till I get through shaking him." "It didn't hurt," said Peg reflectively, "but it ruined all my clothes. Do you think Prince Pompadore minds having me look so shabby?" Kabumpo shifted about uneasily. "Will this help?" he asked sheepishly, pulling a lovely pearl necklace from his pocket. "Ozma doesn't need everything," he muttered to himself. "Oh, how perfectly pomiferous!" cried Peg. "Lift me down so I can try it on." In a trice Kabumpo swung her down from the tree and awkwardly Peg Amy clasped the chain about her wooden neck. Then she flung both arms round Kabumpo's trunk. "You're the biggest darling old elephant in Oz!" cried Peg happily. Kabumpo blinked. He was accustomed to being called elegant and magnificent, but no one, not even Pompa, had ever called him an old darling before, and he found he liked it immensely. While Peg ran to look at her reflection in a small pool, he resolved to get the wooden doll a position at court, for in spite of her stiff fingers, Peg was very deft and clever. "And she shall have a purple plush dress, too," said Kabumpo grandly. Just then Pompa and Wag returned in a high good humor. The Prince had tapped on the door of a small farmhouse, and the little Winky lady had been most hospitable. Not only had she given the Prince all he could eat, but she had allowed Wag to go into the garden and pick 2 dozen of her best cabbages. His size had greatly astonished her, and she had insisted upon measuring him twice with her yellow tape measure, but finally, without revealing the purpose of their journey, the two managed to get away. As all were now refreshed and rested, they decided to start on again. "We ought to reach Ev by evening," puffed Wag between hops. "But I wish we could open the magic box," sighed Peg, holding on to Wag's ear. "For in that box there's flying fluid." "We'd make a remarkably nice lot of birds," chuckled Kabumpo, looking over his shoulder. "Now wouldn't we?" "You would," laughed Pompa. "What else was in the box, Peg?" It was hard to talk while they were being jolted along, but Peg, being of wood, did not feel the bumps, and Pompa, being a Prince, pretended not to, so that they continued their conversation in jerky sentences. "There's vanishing cream, a little tea kettle, and some kind of rays, and a question box," said Peg, holding up her wooden hand. "A question box that answers any question you ask it." "There is!" exclaimed Kabumpo, stopping short. "Well, I wish we could ask it whether Pumperdink has disappeared." "And how to rescue Ozma, and who sent the scroll," cried Pompa. "Oh, do let me try to open it, Peg." So Peg handed over Glegg's magic box, and as they pounded along, the Prince tried to pry it open with his pearl penknife. "It would save us such a lot of trouble," he murmured, holding it up and screwing his eye to the keyhole. "Better let it alone," advised Wag, wiggling his ears nervously. "Suppose you should grow as big for you as I am for me? Suppose you should explode or vanish?" "Vanish?" coughed Kabumpo. "Great Grump! Put it away, Pompa. Wait till we reach Ev and make that wicked little Ruggedo open it for us. Who is this Glegg, anyway?" "A lawless magician, I guess," said Wag, "or he wouldn't have owned a box of mixed magic. Ozma doesn't allow anyone to practice magic, you know." "Why, I'll bet he was the person who sent the scroll!" exclaimed the Prince suddenly. "Don't you remember, Kabumpo? It was signed J.G." "Not a doubt in the world," rumbled Kabumpo. "I'll throw him up a tree when I catch him, and Ruggedo too." "Oh, please don't," begged Peg Amy. "Perhaps they are sorry." "Not half as sorry as they will be," wheezed Kabumpo, plowing ahead through the long grass like a big ferry boat under full steam. Wag hopped close behind, and Peg kept her eyes fixed upon Pompa's back. In spite of his scorched head, he seemed to Peg the most delightful Prince imaginable. "I'll brush off his cloak and cut his hair evenly," thought Peg. "Then perhaps Ozma will say yes when he tells her his story and asks for her hand. But I wonder what will become of me." Peg sighed ever so softly and looked down with distaste at her wooden hands and torn old dress. Nothing very exciting could happen to a shabby wooden doll. "Why, I haven't even any right to be alive," she reflected sadly. "I'm only meant to be funny. Well, never mind. Perhaps I can help Pompa, and maybe that's why I was brought to life." This thought, and the gleam of the lovely pearls Kabumpo had given her, so cheered Peg that she began to hum a queer, squeaky little song. The country was growing rougher and more hilly every minute. The sunny farmlands lay far behind them now, And as Peg finished her song, they came to the edge of a queer, dead-looking forest. The trees were dry and without leaves, and there were quantities of stiff bushes and short, stunted little trees standing under the taller ones. Peg had an odd feeling that hundreds of eyes were staring out at them, but the forest was so dim that she couldn't be sure. There was not a sound but the crackling of the dead branches under Wag's and Kabumpo's feet. "I don't like this," choked Wag. "My wocks and hoopsoons! What a peerful chase!" "It isn't very cheerful," shivered Peg. "Oh, look, Wag! That big tree has eyes." At Peg's remark the tree doubled up its branches into fists and stepped right out in front of them. At the same instant all the other trees and bushes moved closer with dry, crackling steps. "Now we have you!" snapped the tallest tree in a dreadful voice. "Now we have you!" crackled all the other skitter-witchy creatures, crowding closer. "Pigs, pigs, we're twigs, we'll tweak your ears and snatch your wigs!" they shouted all together. One, taller than the rest, leaned over and seized Wag by the ear with its twisted fingers. "Help!" screamed Wag, kicking out with his hind legs. Immediately Kabumpo began laying about with his trunk. "Stand back!" he trumpeted angrily, "or I'll trample you to splinters!" Pompa stood up on Kabumpo's back and began to wave his sword threateningly. At this the ugly creatures grew simply furious. They snatched at the Prince with their long claw-like branches, tearing at his sadly scorched hair and almost upsetting him. "Stop! Stop!" cried Peg Amy, waving her wooden arms frantically. "Don't hit him! He's going to be married! Hit me! I'm only made of wood!" "Don't you dare hit her!" shrilled Pompa, slicing off the branch head of the nearest twig. "I am a Prince and she is under my protection. Don't touch her!" By this time Kabumpo had cleared himself a space ahead and Wag a space behind. Every time Kabumpo's trunk flew out, a dozen of the queer, crackly bushmen tumbled over forward, and every time Wag's heels flew out, a dozen crumpled over backward. Pompa kept his sword whirling, and after several had lost top branches, the whole crowd fell back and began grumbling together. "Now then," puffed Kabumpo angrily, "let's make a dash for it, Wag. Come on, we'll smash them to kindling wood." "What's all this commotion?" cried a loud voice. The twigs fell back immediately and a bent and twisted old tree hobbled forward. "Strangers, your Woodjesty," whispered a tall twig, waving a branch at Kabumpo. "Well, have you pinched them?" asked the King in a bored voice. "A little," admitted the tall twig nervously, "but they object to it, your Woodjesty." "Well, what if they do?" rasped the King tartly. "Don't be Normish, faggots. You know I detest Normishness. It seems to me you might allow my people a little innocent diversion," he grumbled, turning to Pompa. "They don't get much pleasure." "Pleasure!" gasped the Prince, while Kabumpo and Wag were so astonished that they forgot to fight. "What does he mean by gormish?" whispered Peg uneasily to Wag. Before he could answer, the twigs, who evidently had decided not to be gormish, made a rush upon the travelers. But Kabumpo was ready for them with uplifted trunk. With a furious trumpet he charged straight into the middle, Wag at his heels, with the result that the twigs went crackling and snapping to the ground in heaps. "All we need is a match," grunted Kabumpo, pounding along unmindful of the scratching and clawing. "They're good for nothing but kindling wood." "Don't be gormish," he screeched scornfully, as he flung the last twig out of his way, and Wag and he never stopped till they had put a good mile between themselves and the disagreeable pinchers. "Are you hurt?" asked Kabumpo, stopping at last and looking around at Pompa. "If we keep on this way you won't be fit to be seen, much less to marry. Let's have a look at you." He lifted the Prince down carefully and eyed him with consternation. The Prince had 7 long scratches on his cheek, and his velvet cloak was torn to ribbons. "I declare," sputtered the Elegant Elephant explosively, "you're a perfect fright. I declare it's a grumpy shame." "Well, don't be gormish," said the Prince, smiling faintly and wiping his cheek with his handkerchief. "Let me help," begged Peg Amy, falling off Wag's back. "Ozma won't mind a few scratches, and what do clothes matter? Anyone would know he was a Prince," she added, taking Pompa's cloak and regarding it ruefully. Pompa smiled at Peg's earnestness and made her his best bow, but Kabumpo still looked anxious. "Everyone's not so smart as you, Peg," he sighed gloomily. "But come along. The main thing is to rescue Ozma, and after that perhaps she won't notice your scratches and torn cloak. She'll think you got them fighting the giant," he finished more hopefully. With a few more of Kabumpo's jeweled pins, Peg repaired Pompa's cloak. Then, after tying up Wag's ear, which was badly torn, they started off again. "What worries me," said Wag, twitching his nose very fast, "what worries me is crossing the Deadly Desert. We're almost to it, you know." "Never cross deserts till you come to 'em," grunted Kabumpo with a wink at Peg Amy. "Oh, all right," sniffed Wag, "but don't be gormish. You know how I detest gormishness." While Pompa and Peg were laughing over these last remarks, a most terrible rumble sounded behind them. "Now what?" trumpeted Kabumpo, turning about. "Sheverything's mixed up," gulped Wag, putting back his ears. "Hold on to me, Peg." End of Chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Kabumpo and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. Meeting the Runaway Country. Everything was mixed up indeed. Moving toward the little party of rescuers was a huge, jagged piece of land running along on 10 tremendous feet and feeling its way with its long, wiggly peninsula. The feet raised it several yards above the ground. "If we crouch down, maybe it will run over us," panted Pompa, sliding down Kabumpo's trunk. "I don't want to be run over," shrilled Wag, beginning to hop in a frenzied circle. "Stop!" cried the land in a loud voice as Wag and Kabumpo started to run. "Better stop," puffed Kabumpo, his eyes rolling wildly, "or it'll probably fall on us." Trembling in spite of themselves, they stood still and waited for the land to approach. "I've often heard of sailors hailing land with joy," gulped Wag, "but well, how did it get this way?" As the runaway country drew nearer, its peninsula fairly quivered with excitement, and as it reached them it pulled up its front feet and tilted forward to get a better view. Its eyes were 2 small blue lakes, and its mouth a broad bubbling river. "I claim you by right of discovery!" cried the land in its loud river voice, and before they could make any objection, it scooped them up neatly and tossed them on a little hill. "This is outrageous!" spluttered the Elegant Elephant, picking Peg out of some bushes. "We've been kidnapped!" "Let's jump off!" cried Wag, beginning to hop toward the edge. "I wouldn't do that," said the land calmly, "because I'd only run after you again. You might as well settle down and grow up with me. I'm not such a bad little country," it added quietly, "just a bit rough and uncultivated." "Well, what's that got to do with us?" demanded Kabumpo, staring the country right in its lake eyes. "We're on an important mission and we haven't time for this sort of thing at all." "It's a matter of saving a princess," cried Pompa impulsively. "Couldn't you please—" "Let someone else save her," said the country indifferently, beginning to move off sideways like a crab. "You're the first savages I've found, and I'm going to keep you. Not that you're what I'd pick out," it continued ungraciously, That wooden girl looks uncommonly odd, and you two beasts are even queerer. But I'm liberal, I am, and the boy looks all right so far as I can see." "But look here," panted Wag, twitching his nose very fast. "This is all wrong. Land is supposed to stand still, isn't it? You've no right to discover us. We don't want to be discovered. Put us off at once, do you hear?" "Yes, I hear," said the Runaway Country gruffly, "and I've heard about enough. Don't anger me," it shrilled warningly. "Remember, I'm a wild, rough country." "You're the wildest country I ever saw," groaned the Elegant Elephant, falling up against a tree. "And of all ridiculous happenings, this is the worst." "Never mind," whispered Peg Amy, standing on her tiptoes to whisper in Kabumpo's huge ear. "It's taking us in the right direction, and maybe if we were very polite—" "Go ahead and try it," wheezed Kabumpo, rolling his eyes. "I'm too upset." He hugged the tree again. So Peg climbed to the top of the little hill and, waving her wooden arms to attract the country's attention, called cheerfully, "Yoo-hoo, Mr. Land! Where are you going?" At first the Land only blinked his blue lake eyes sulkily, but as Peg paid no attention to his ill temper and began making him pretty compliments on his mountains and trees, he gradually cheered up. "I'm going to be an island," he announced finally. "That's where I'm going. I'm tired of being a hot, dry, old, undiscovered plateau, and I don't intend to stop till I come to the Nonestic Ocean." "Oh!" groaned Wag, falling over backwards. "We're going to be cast away on a desert island." Peg held up a warning finger. "What made you want to run away and be an island?" she asked faintly, for even to Peg things looked serious. "Well," began the Land, giving itself a hitch, "I lay patiently for years and years, waiting to be discovered. Nobody came, not even one little missionary. I kept getting lonelier and lonelier. You see how broken up I am." "Yes, we can see that all right," sniffed Kabumpo. "And I'm ambitious," continued the Country huskily. "I want to be cultivated and built up like other kingdoms. So one day I made up my mind I wouldn't wait any longer, but would run off myself and discover some settlers. As I have 10 mountains and each has a foot, there seemed to be no reason why I shouldn't run away. So I did, and I have." The Country rolled its lakes triumphantly at the little party on the hill. "I have found some settlers, and I'm looking to you to develop me into a good modern up-to-Oz kingdom. I'm a progressive country, and I expect you to improve and make something out of me," it continued earnestly. "There's gold to be dug out of my mountains, plenty of good farm land to be planted, and cities to be built, and—" "What do you think we are?" exploded Kabumpo indignantly. "Slaves?" "He'll get used to it in time," said the Runaway Country, paying no attention to Kabumpo, "and he'll be useful for drawing logs. Now you"—he turned his watery eyes full on Peg Amy—"you seem to be the most sensible one in the party, so I think I shall bestow myself upon you. Of course, you're not at all handsome nor regular, but from now on you may consider yourself a princess and me as your kingdom." "Thank you. Thank you very much," said Peg Amy, hardly knowing what else to say. "Hurrah for the Princess of Runaway Island!" cried Wag, standing on his head. "I always knew you were a princess, Peg, my dear." "Oh, hush!" whispered Pompa. "Can't you see it's getting more reasonable? Maybe Peg can persuade it to stop." "If it doesn't stop soon, I'll tear all its trees out by the roots," grumbled Kabumpo under his breath. "Logging, indeed! Great Grump! Here's the Deadly Desert!" The air was now so hot and choking that Pompa flung herself face down on the cool grass. The Runaway Country did not seem to notice the burning sands and pattered smoothly along on its 10 mountain feet. Something has to be done quick, breathed Peg, clasping her hands, for soon we'll be in Ev. Pompa, holding his silk handkerchief before his face, had come up beside her, and they both looked anxiously for the first signs of the country that held Ruggedo and the giant who had run off with Ozma's palace. "Oh, Mr. Land!" called Peg suddenly. "Yes, Princess," answered the country without slackening its speed. "Have you thought about feeding us?" asked the wooden doll gently. "I don't see any fruit trees or vegetables or chickens, and settlers must eat, you know. We ought to have some seeds to plant and some building materials, oughtn't we, if we're going to make you into an up to Oz country?" "Pshaw!" said the Runaway Country, stopping with a jolt. "I never thought of that. Can't you eat grass and fish? There's fine fish in my lakes." "Well, I don't eat it all," explained Peg pleasantly, "but Pompa is a Prince, and a Prince has to have meat and vegetables and puddings on Sunday, and I have to have lettuce and carrots and cabbages or I won't work," cried Wag, thumping with his hind feet and winking at Kabumpo. "I'll not dig a single mountain." "And I've got to have my ton of hay a day, too," trumpeted the Elegant Elephant, "or I'll not lug a single log. Pretty poor sort of a country you are, expecting us to live on grass as if we were donkeys and goats." The Runaway Country rolled its lakes helplessly from one to the other. "I thought settlers always managed to get a living off the land," it murmured in a troubled voice. "Not us," rumbled Kabumpo. "Not enough pie and pioneer to suit this party." "Has your Highness anything to suggest?" asked the Country, looking anxiously at Peg. "Well," said the Wooden Doll slowly, "suppose we stop at the first country we come to and stock up. We could get a few chickens and seeds and saws and hammers and things." "You'd run away," said the Runaway Country suspiciously. "Not but what I trust you, Princess," he added hastily, "but them." He scowled darkly at Kabumpo and Wag. "I'll not let them out of my sight." "How our little floating island loves us!" chuckled Wag, nudging the Elegant Elephant. "They won't run away," said Peg softly, "and if they did you could easily catch them again." "That's so. I'll stop wherever you say," sighed the Country, starting on again. "What are you going to do?" whispered Pompa, catching Peg's arm. "I don't know," said Peg honestly, "but perhaps if we make it stop something will turn up. We're almost across the desert now, and that's a big help." "You're wonderful!" cried Pompa, eyeing Peg gratefully. "How can I ever thank you?" "Better get your sword ready," said Peg practically, "for we may run into that giant any minute now." Even Kabumpo and Wag had stopped making jokes and were straining their eyes toward Ev. "Let's all stand together!" gasped Wag breathlessly. Before Peg or Pompa had time to plan or Kabumpo to reply, the Runaway Country stepped off the desert and swept over the border and into the Kingdom of Ev, making straight for a tall purple mountain. "Do you see anything that looks like a giant or a palace?" asked Peg, leaning forward. "Oh, help!" screamed Wag just then, while Kabumpo gave an ear-splitting trumpet. Peg grasped Pompa and Pompa clutched Peg, and no wonder! Directly in front of them were the legs and feet of the most terrible and tremendous giant they had ever imagined. He was sitting on the mountain itself, and only a part of him was visible, for his head and shoulders were lost in the clouds. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" rumbled the Runaway Country, tilting forward slightly so it could see. One look was enough. With a frightened jump that sent the four travelers hurtling through the air, it began running backwards and in a moment was out of sight. Peg was the first to recover her senses. Being wood, bumps didn't bother her. She rose stiffly and gazed around her. Pompa's feet were waving feebly from a small clump of bushes. Kabumpo stood swaying nearby, while Wag lay over on his side with closed eyes. "Oh, you poor dears!" murmured Peg, and running over to the bushes she pulled out the Prince of Pumperdink and settled him with his back against a tree. He was much shaken by his high dive from the island, but pulled himself together and patted Peg's wooden hand kindly. By this time Kabumpo had gotten his bearings and came wobbling over. "You've got a black eye, I see," wheezed the Elegant Elephant bitterly. "Not so very black," said Peg cheerfully. "Are you hurt, Kabumpo?" The Elegant Elephant felt himself all over with his trunk. "Well, I'm not used to being flung about like a bean bag," he said irritably. Then he lowered his voice hastily as he caught another glimpse of those dreadful giant feet. "I'll go help Wag," he whispered, backing away quickly. It took some time to rouse the giant rabbit, but finally he opened his eyes. "I thought a giant," he muttered thickly. "Hush!" warned Kabumpo. "He's over there." He waved his trunk in the direction of the mountain and began dragging Wag firmly away. "Come on over here," he called in a loud whisper to Peg and Pompa. Leaning heavily on Peg Amy, the Prince came. Then he gave a cry of distress. "My sword!" he gasped, staring around a bit wildly. "I'll find it," said Peg obligingly. "You sit still and rest." "Where's the magic box?" coughed Kabumpo with an uneasy glance in the giant's direction. Now that they were actually in Ev, the Elegant Elephant began to doubt the wisdom of his plan for killing the monster. "Gone!" wailed Pompa, feeling in his pocket. "I dropped it when I fell off the land. What shall we do, Kabumpo?" "Don't be a gooch," gulped the Elegant Elephant, but he said it without spirit. "It's probably around here somewhere." Moving quietly, Kabumpo began to poke about with his trunk. Just then Peg Amy came flying toward them, her ragged dress fluttering in the breeze. "Look!" whispered the wooden doll, dropping on her knees before them. In her hands was Glegg's box of mixed magic, and it was open. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Kabumpo in Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18, Prince Pompadore Proposes. While Peg and Pompa and the Elegant Elephant eyed the box, Wag, twitching his nose and mumbling very fast under his breath, backed rapidly away. He was not going to run the risk of any more explosions. So anxious was the big rabbit to put a good distance between himself and Glegg's mixed magic that he never realized that he was backing toward the giant till a sharp thump on the back of the head brought him up short. Trembling in every hair, Wag looked over his shoulder. Stars! He had run into the terrible five-toed foot of the giant himself. At first Wag was too terrified to move, but suddenly the hair on the back of his neck bristled erect. He peered at the giant's foot more attentively. His eyes snapped, and seizing a stout stick that lay nearby, he brought it down with all his might on the giant's toes. "It's Ruggedo!" screamed Wag, hopping up and down with rage. "And I'll pound his curly toes off. I don't care if he is a giant. I'll pound his curly toes off." The stick whistled through the air and whacked the giant's toes again. Now, of course, we have known all along that the giant was Ruggedo, but it was a great surprise for the rescuers. Ruggedo was bad enough to deal with as a gnome, but a giant Ruggedo? Horrors! "Stop him! Stop him!" cried Peg Amy, throwing up her hands and scattering the contents of the box of magic in every direction. "What are you trying to do?" roared Kabumpo, plunging forward. "Get us all trampled on?" A muffled cry came down from the clouds and, as Kabumpo dragged Wag back by the ear, something flashed through the air and bounced upon the Elegant Elephant's head. "It's the Scarecrow!" chattered Wag, wriggling from beneath Kabumpo's trunk. Kabumpo opened his eyes and peered down at the limp bundle at his feet. As he looked, the bundle began to pull itself together. It sat up awkwardly and began clutching itself into shape. "Where'd you come from?" gasped the Elegant Elephant. Without speaking, the Scarecrow waved his hand upward and rose unsteadily to his feet. Then, catching sight of Peg Amy and Pompadore, the straw man bowed politely. Meanwhile, Wag, seeing that Kabumpo's attention was diverted, began to sidle back toward Ruggedo. "Stop!" cried the Scarecrow, running after him. "Are you crazy? Don't you know Ozma's palace is on his head? Every time he moves, everyone in the palace tumbles about. Was it you who stirred him up and made him spill me out of the window?" "I'll wake him up some more, the wicked old Scrabble Scratch," muttered Wag, but Kabumpo jerked him back roughly. "Great Grump!" choked the Elegant Elephant, shaking Wag in his exasperation. "Here we've come all the way to save Princess Ozma and now you want to upset everything." "That's the way to do it," said the Scarecrow, rolling his eyes wildly. "Please stop it, Wag," begged Peg Amy, throwing her wooden arms around the big rabbit's neck. And as Pompa added his voice to Peg's, Wag finally threw down his stick. "Who is that beautiful girl?" asked the Scarecrow of Kabumpo. The Elegant Elephant looked at the straw man sharply to see that he was not poking fun at the wooden doll. Finding he was quite serious, he said proudly, "That's Peg Amy, the best little body in Oz. She's under my protection," he added grandly. Just then Pompa and Peg came over and Wag, who had often seen the Scarecrow in the Emerald City, introduced them all. "Did I understand you to say you had come to rescue Ozma?" asked the Scarecrow, who could not keep his eyes off the Elegant Elephant. "Did I understand you to say Ozma's palace was on Ruggedo's head?" shuddered Kabumpo, glancing fearfully in the direction of the mountain. The Scarecrow nodded vigorously and told in a few words of their terrible journey to Ev and their present perilous position. How the palace had gotten on Ruggedo's head, he admitted, was a puzzle to him. Kabumpo and Pompadore listened with amazement, especially to the part where they had threatened Ruggedo with eggs. "And he's kept still for 2 days just on account of eggs?" gasped the Elegant Elephant incredulously. "Well, no," admitted the Scarecrow, wrinkling up his forehead. "A little man came flying through the air the first morning and bumped into the palace, and instantly everyone except Scraps and me fell asleep. Ruggedo was put to sleep too. We could hear him snoring." "Why, it must have been the Sandman," breathed Peg Amy. "I have heard he lived near here." "Are they asleep now?" asked Pompa, clutching the Scarecrow's arm. How romantic, thought the Prince of Pumperdink, to rescue and waken a sleeping princess. But the Scarecrow shook his head. "A few minutes before I fell out they began to wake up, and I'd just gone to the window to look for Glinda when Ruggedo gave a howl and ducked his head, and here I fell." The Scarecrow spread his hands eloquently and smiled at Peg. "Has Glinda been here?" asked Kabumpo jealously. "Yes," said the Scarecrow. "She came this morning and she's been trying all sorts of magic to reduce Ruggedo without harm to the palace." "Great Grump! Do you hear that?" Kabumpo rolled his eyes anxiously toward the Prince. "If Glinda's magic takes effect before ours, then where'll we be? Peg! Peg! Where's the box of mixed magic?" "Would you mind telling me," burst out the Scarecrow, who had been examining one after another in the party with a puzzled expression, "would you mind telling me how you happened to know about the palace disappearing? How you got across the sandy desert? How you expect to help us? How he," with a jerk at Wag, "came to be too large? How she," with a jerk of his thumb at Peg, "came to be alive? And—" "All in good time, all in good time," trumpeted Kabumpo testily. "You sound like the Curious Cottabus. The principal thing to do now is to save Ozma. Will Ruggedo stay quiet a little longer?" "If he's not disturbed," said the Scarecrow with a meaning glance at Wag. Well, my hocks and whoop soons, cried the rabbit indignantly. Isn't anyone going to punish him? He shook and shook Peg, and he meddled with magic and blew up into a giant. He's run off with the palace. Doesn't he deserve a pounding? Friend, said the Scarecrow, I admire your spirit, but my excellent brains tell me that this is a case where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But have we the ounce of prevention? Here's the question box, announced Peg, who had run off at Kabumpo's first call. What shall we ask it first? How to save the lovely Princess of Oz, spoke up Pompa, running his hand over his scorched locks. Where's my crown, Kabumpo? Kabumpo fished the crown from his pocket and Pompa set it gravely upon his head as Peg asked the question box. How shall we save the lovely Princess of Oz? These maneuvers so astonished the Scarecrow that he lost his balance and fell flat on his nose. When he recovered, Peg was clapping her wooden hands and Kabumpo was dancing on 3 legs. You're as good as married, my boy, cried Kabumpo, thumping the Prince upon his back. What is it? What's happened? Gasped the Scarecrow. Why, the question box says to pour 3 drops of Trick Tea on Ruggedo's left foot and 2 on his right, and he will then march back to the Emerald City, descend into his cave, and after the palace has settled firmly on its foundations, he will shrink down to his former size, read Peg Amy, holding the question box close to her eyes, for the printing was very small. Hurrah! cried the Scarecrow, throwing up his hat. Peggy, put the kettle on and we'll all have some tea. But where'd you get all this magic stuff? He asked immediately after. Out of a box of mixed magic, puffed Kabumpo, his little eyes twinkling with anticipation as he watched Peg. First she filled the tiny kettle at a nearby brook. Then she lit the little lamp and dropped some of the Trick Tea into the kettle. Bright pink clouds arose from the kettle as soon as Peg had set it over the flame, and while they waited for it to boil, Pompa put another question. Has Pumperdink disappeared? Asked the Prince in a trembling voice. N-O, spelled the question box slowly, and Kabumpo settled back with a great sigh of relief. I told you everything would be all right if you followed my advice, said the Elegant Elephant. Stand up now and try to forget your black eye. You are the Prince of Pumperdink, and I am the Elegant Elephant of Oz. But why all the ceremony? Asked the Scarecrow, looking mystified. Kabumpo only chuckled to himself, and as the Trick Tea was now ready, Peg took the little kettle and began to tiptoe toward Ruggedo. I hope it's red hot, grumbled Wag resentfully. He's getting off easy, the old Scrabble-Scratch. Getting off. Say, look here. He gestured violently at Kabumpo. If Ruggedo returns to the Emerald City with the palace on his head, where does Pompa come in? He pointed a trembling paw at the Prince, his nose twitching so fast it made the Scarecrow blink. Stop! Trumpeted the Elegant Elephant, plunging after Peg Amy. He reached her just in time. I'm no better than Pumper, grunted Kabumpo, mopping his brow with the tail of his robe. Oh, suppose after all our hardships I had allowed Ozma and the palace to get away without giving Pompa a chance to ask her. But we ought to save her as quick as we can, ventured Peg. Couldn't we hurry back to the Emerald City again? It might be too late, wheezed Kabumpo. Let me see. Hello, cried the Scarecrow. Here comes Glinda. As he spoke, the swan chariot of the good sorceress floated down beside the little party. Bother, groaned Kabumpo as Glinda stepped out. Some strangers, called the Scarecrow, gleefully running toward Glinda. Some strangers with a box of mixed magic trying to help. If we could have a few words with Ozma, put in the Elegant Elephant hastily, everything would be all right. Glinda looked at Kabumpo gravely. It's unlawful to practice magic. You must know that, said the sorceress sternly. But it's not our magic, your Highness, explained Peg Amy, setting down the little kettle. We found it, and we're only trying to help Ozma." "Well, in that case," Glinda could not help smiling at the wooden doll's quaint appearance, "I shall be glad to assist you, as all of my magic has proved useless." "Aren't you the Prince of Pumperdink?" she asked, nodding toward Pompa. The Prince bowed in his most princely fashion and assured her that he was, and, after a few hasty explanations, Glinda promised to bring Ozma down in her chariot. "Tell her," trumpeted Kabumpo impressively as the chariot rose in the air, "tell her that a young prince waits below." While Pompa was still looking after Glinda's chariot, Peg Amy came up to him and extended both her wooden hands. "I wish you much happiness, Pompa dear," said the wooden doll in a low voice. Pompa pressed Peg's hands gratefully. "If it hadn't been for you, I'd never have succeeded. You shall have everything you wish for now, Peg. Why, where are you going?" "Goodbye," called Peg Amy, trying to keep her voice as cheerful as her painted face. And before anyone could stop her, she began to run toward a little grove of trees. "Come back!" cried the Prince, starting after her. "Come back!" trumpeted Kabumpo in alarm. "I'll get her," coughed Wag, hopping forward jealously. "I've known her the longest." Pompa and Kabumpo both started to run, too, but just at that minute down swooped the chariot and out jumped Ozma, the lovely little ruler of Oz. "At last!" gasped Kabumpo, pushing Pompa forward. If Ozma was startled by their singular appearance, she was too polite to say so, and she returned Pompa's deep bow with a still deeper curtsy. "Glinda tells me you have come a long, long way just to help me," said Ozma anxiously. "Is that so?" "Princess," cried Pompa, falling on his knee, "I know you are worried about your palace and your courtiers and your friends. 2 drops of that triple trick tea," he waved at the small kettle, "upon Ruggedo's right foot and 3 on his left will set everything right." "But where did you get it? And why?" Ozma looked doubtfully at the Scarecrow. "Might as well try it," advised the Scarecrow. "We will explain everything later," puffed the Elegant Elephant. "Trust old Kabumpo, your Highness, and everything will turn out happily." "I believe I will," smiled Ozma. "Will you try the trick tea, Glinda?" Glinda took the kettle and poured it exactly as directed. First Ruggedo gave a gusty sigh that blew the clouds about in every direction. "Look out!" warned Glinda. Next instant they all fluttered down like a pack of cards, for Ruggedo had taken a giant step that shook the earth as if it had been a block of jelly. And when they had picked themselves up, Ruggedo was out of sight, tramping like a giant in a dream, back toward the Emerald City. "You wait here," cried Glinda to Ozma, "and I'll follow him." She sprang into her chariot. "How do you know he'll go back?" asked the little ruler of Oz, staring with straining eyes for a glimpse of the giant. "Because the Question Box said so," chuckled Kabumpo triumphantly. "Good magic," approved the Scarecrow. "But where is that charming Peg? I think I'll run find her." No sooner had the Scarecrow disappeared than Pompa, swallowing very hard, again approached Ozma. But Ozma, still looking after Glinda's vanishing chariot, was hardly aware of the Prince of Pumperdink. Poor Pompa dropped on his knee, which had a large hole in it by this time, and began mumbling indistinct sentences. Then, as Kabumpo frowned with disgust, the Prince burst out desperately, "Princess, will you marry me?" "Marry you?" gasped the little ruler of Oz. "Good gracious, no!" End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Kabumpo and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. Ozma Takes Things in Hand. Prince Pompadour jumped up quickly. "I told you she wouldn't," he choked, looking reproachfully at Kabumpo. "I'm not half good enough." "He doesn't always look so scratched up and shabby," wheezed Kabumpo breathlessly. "We've been scorched and pinched and kidnapped. We've been through every kind of hardship to save your Highness. And now—" The Elegant Elephant slouched against a tree, the picture of discouragement. He seemed to have forgotten the jewels that were to have won the Princess for Pompa, and his threat of running off with her should she refuse him. "Why, you don't even know me!" cried Ozma, dismayed by even the thought of marrying. For though the little ruler of Oz had lived almost 1,000 years, she is no older than you are, and would no more think of marrying than Dorothy or Betsy Bobbin or Trot. Ruling the Kingdom of Oz takes almost all Ozma's time, and in any that is left she wants to play and enjoy herself like any other sensible little girl. For Ozma is only a little girl fairy after all. "I'm not going to marry anybody," she declared stoutly. Then, because she really was touched by Pompa's woebegone appearance, she asked more kindly, "Why did you want to marry me especially?" "Because you are the properest Princess in Oz," groaned the Prince, leaning disconsolately against Kabumpo. "Because if we don't, Pumperdink will disappear and my poor old father and my mother and everyone." "Not to speak of us," gulped the Elegant Elephant. "But where is Pumperdink, and who said it would disappear?" asked Ozma in amazement. "And how did you happen to have this trick tea and come to rescue me?" "The Prince always rescues the Princess he intends to marry," said Kabumpo wearily. "I should think you'd know that." "Well, I'm very grateful, and I'll do anything I can except marry you," exclaimed Ozma, who was beginning to feel very much interested in this strange pair. "Thank you," said Kabumpo stiffly, for he was deeply offended. "Thank you, but we must be going. Come along, Pompa." "Don't be a gooch." This time it was Pompa who spoke. "I'm going to tell her everything." And Pompa, being, as I have told you before, the most charming Prince in the world, made Ozma a comfortable throne of green boughs and, throwing himself at her feet, poured out the whole story of their adventures, beginning with the birthday party and the mysterious scroll. He told of their meeting with Peg, Amy and Wag, and ended up with the ride upon the Runaway Country. Kabumpo stood by, swaying sulkily. He was very much disappointed in the Princess of Oz. He felt that she had no proper appreciation of his or Pompa's importance. "I'm going to find Peg," he called finally. "She's got more sense than any of you," he wheezed under his breath as he swept grandly out of sight. Ozma put both hands to her head as Pompa finished his recital, and really it was enough to puzzle any fairy. Scrolls, live wooden dolls, a giant rabbit, a mysterious magician threatening disappearances, and Ruggedo's wicked use of the box of mixed magic. "Goodness!" cried the little ruler of Oz. "I wish the Scarecrow would come back. He's so clever I'm sure he could help us. But first you had better bring me the magic box." Pompa rose slowly and picking up all the little flasks and boxes that had spilled out when Wag pounded Ruggedo, he put them back into the casket and handed it to Ozma. She examined the contents as curiously as the others had done. The expanding extract was the only thing missing, for Ruggedo had poured the whole bottle over his head. The question box seemed to Ozma the most wonderful of all Glegg's magic. "Why, all we have to do is to ask this box questions!" she cried in excitement. "Has my palace reached the Emerald City?" she asked breathlessly. "Shake it 3 times," said Pompa, as Ozma looked in vain for her answer. "Yes," stated the box after the 3rd shake, and Ozma sighed with relief. "I suppose you asked it if I were the proper Princess mentioned in the scroll?" she said a bit shyly. The Prince shook his head. "Knew without asking," said Pompa heavily. "Do you mean to say you never asked it that?" gasped Ozma in disbelief. "Why, I am surprised at you." And before Pompa could object, she shook the little box briskly. "Who is the Princess that Pompa must marry?" she demanded anxiously. "The Princess of Sun Top Mountain," flashed the question box promptly. Then, as an afterthought, it added, "Trust the mirror and golden doorknob." "Now you see!" cried Ozma, jumping up in delight. "I wasn't the proper Princess at all." Pompa smiled faintly but without enthusiasm. The thought of hunting another Princess was almost too much. "I wish I could just take Peg Amy and Wag and go back to Pumperdink without marrying anybody," he choked bitterly. "Now don't give up," advised Ozma kindly. "It was very wrong of Glegg to cause you all this trouble. I'm going to keep his box of mixed magic and take away all his powers when I find him, but until I do, you'll have to follow directions. Oh, mercy! What's that?" They both ducked and turned around in a hurry as a terrific thumping sounded behind them. "It's the Runaway Country again!" cried Pompa, seizing Ozma's hands in distress. "And it's caught all the others!" The Scarecrow had climbed a tree and was waving to them wildly as the Country galloped nearer. "Might as well come aboard," he called genially. "This is a fast country, no arguing with it at all." Ozma looked helplessly at Pompa, and the Prince had only time to grasp her more firmly when the Country scooped them neatly into the air. Down they tumbled beside Peg Amy and Wag and the Elegant Elephant. "What do you mean by this?" demanded Ozma as soon as she regained her breath. "Don't you know that this lady is the ruler of all Oz?" cried Pompa warningly. "Peg's the ruler of me," replied the Country calmly. "I nearly lost her once, but now I've caught her and all the rest, and I'm not going to stop until I've reached the Nonestic Ocean, giants or no giants." Ozma had been somewhat prepared for the Runaway Country by Pompa's description, but she had never dreamed it would dare to run off with her. While Peg Amy began to coax it to stop, she took out Glegg's little question box. "How shall I stop this country?" she whispered anxiously. "Spin around 6 times and cross your fingers," directed the question box. This Ozma proceeded to do, much to the agitation of the Scarecrow, who thought she had taken leave of her senses. But the next instant the Country came to a jolting halt. "Peg, Princess Peg!" shrieked the island. "I am bewitched! I can't move a step!" "Then everybody off!" shouted the Scarecrow, jerking a branch of tree as if he were a conductor. "Into the line, everybody off!" And they lost no time tumbling off the wild little Country. "It seems too bad to leave it," said Peg Amy regretfully, picking herself up. "It threw us off without any feeling or consideration when it saw Ruggedo," sniffed Kabumpo. "Therefore it has no claims on us whatsoever." "But couldn't you do something for it?" asked Peg, approaching Ozma timidly. "It was so tired of being a plateau. Couldn't you let it be an island and find someone to settle on it? I wouldn't mind going," she added generously. "You shall do nothing of the sort!" cried Kabumpo angrily. "You're going back to Pumperdink with Pompa and me." "She's going with me!" cried Wag. "Aren't you, Peg?" "You seem to be a very popular person," smiled Ozma. "While a country has no right to run away, and while I never heard of one doing it before, I've no objections to it being an island. It's running off with people I object to." She looked the Country sternly in its lake eyes. "But I can't move!" screamed the Country, tears streaming down its hill. "And I've got to have somebody to settle me." "Oh, here's Glinda!" shouted the Scarecrow, tossing up his hat. "Now we shall know what happened to Ruggedo." Leaving the Country for a moment, they all ran to welcome the good Sorceress of Oz. Glinda's reports were most satisfactory. Ruggedo had walked straight back to the Emerald City, stepped into the yawning cavern, and immediately the palace had settled firmly upon its old foundations. Then had come a muffled explosion, and when Glinda and Dorothy had run through the secret passage, which had been discovered meanwhile by the Soldier with the Green Whiskers, they saw Ruggedo, shrunken to his former size, sitting angrily on his sixth rock of history. "I have locked him up in the palace," finished Glinda, "and I strongly advise your Highness to punish him severely." Ozma sighed. "What would you do?" she asked, appealing to the Scarecrow. So many things had come up for her attention and advice in the last few hours that the little fairy ruler felt positively dizzy. "Let's all sit down in a circle and think," proposed the Scarecrow cheerfully. This they all did except Kabumpo, who stood off glumly by himself. Peg was looking anxiously at Pompadore, for the Elegant Elephant had told her of Ozma's refusal, and wondering sadly what she could do to help, when the Scarecrow bounced up impulsively. "I have it!" chuckled the Straw Man. "Let's send Ruggedo off on the Runaway Country. He deserves to be banished, and if Ozma makes the country an island he can do no harm." Here Ozma had to stop and explain to Glinda about the country that wanted to be an island, and after a short consultation they decided to take the Scarecrow's advice. "Just as soon as I reach the Emerald City, I'll put on my magic belt and wish him onto the island," declared Ozma. "And I think we'd better go right straight back," she added thoughtfully, "for it's growing darker every minute and Dorothy will be anxious to hear everything that's happened. Now you," Ozma tapped Pompadore gently on the arm, "you must start at once for Sun Top Mountain. I'm going to ask the question box just where it is." Pompa sighed deeply, and when Ozma consulted the question box as to the location of Sun Top Mountain, it stated that this kingdom was in the very center of the North Winkie Country. "That's fine," said Ozma, clapping her hands. "I'll have the Runaway Country carry you over the Deadly Desert, and as soon as you have married the Princess, you must bring her to see me in the Emerald City." "What's all this?" demanded Kabumpo, pricking up his ears. "The question box says I must marry the Princess of Sun Top Mountain," said Pompa, getting up wearily. "Well, great Gump! Why couldn't it have said so before?" asked Kabumpo shrilly. "You never asked it," snapped Wag, twitching his nose. "I told you Ozma wasn't the Princess mentioned in the scroll." "Now don't quarrel," begged Peg Amy, jumping up hastily. "There's still plenty of time to save Pumperdink. Come along, Pompa." "That's right," said Ozma, smiling approvingly at Peg. "And when Pompa finds his Princess, you must come and live with me in the Emerald City, for as Ruggedo was responsible for bringing you to life, I want to take care of you always." Peg Amy dropped a curtsy and promised to come, but she didn't feel very cheerful about it. Then, as Ozma was anxious to get back to the Emerald City, they all hurried to the Runaway Country. "You are to take these travelers across the Deadly Desert," said Ozma, addressing the Runaway Country quite sternly, "and you are to set them down in the Winkie Country. If you do this, I will restore your moving power again and give you a little gnome for king. Then you may run off to the Nonestic Ocean as soon as ever you wish." "I want Peg," pouted the Country, "but if that's the best you can do, I suppose I'll have to stand it." After a little more grumbling, it agreed to Ozma's terms. Wearily, Kabumpo, Wag, Peg and Pompa climbed aboard, and then Ozma spun around 6 times in the opposite direction, and immediately the Country found itself able to move again. "Goodbye!" called Ozma as she and the Scarecrow jumped into Glinda's chariot. "Goodbye and good luck!" "Goodbye!" called Peg, waving her old torn bonnet. "Good riddance!" grumbled the Country gruffly, and turning sideways began running toward the Deadly Desert. End of Chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Kabumpo and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. The Proper Princess is Found. "Is the mirror safe, and have you still got the gold doorknob?" asked Pompa as the Country swung out onto the deadly desert. "The question box said I was to trust them, you know." "And by what right did Ozma take that box?" wheezed Kabumpo irritably as he felt in his pocket to see whether the magic articles were still there. "That's gratitude for you! We find Glegg's box of mixed magic and rescue her, and off she goes with our magic, leaving us to the tender mercies of a runaway Country." "You find the box!" shrilled Wag. "Well, I like that!" "Oh, what difference does it make?" groaned Pompa, stretching out upon the ground. They were all completely exhausted by the day's adventures and as cross as three sticks, all except Peg Amy, who never was cross. "I shall marry this princess and save my country, but I'm going away as soon as the wedding is over and spend the rest of my life in travel," announced Pompa gloomily. "Don't blame you," rumbled the Elegant Elephant with a sniff. "Ah, now," laughed Peg, "that doesn't sound like you, Pompa. Why, maybe this princess will be so lovely you'll want to carry her straight back to Pumperdink." "I think princesses are a great bore," said Wag with a terrific yawn. "I prefer plain folks like Peg and the Scarecrow." "You're all hungry, that's what's the matter," chuckled the Wooden Doll. "When you've had some supper you'll be just as anxious to find the Princess of Sun Top Mountain as you were to find Ozma. Here's the Winkie Country now, and there's a star for good luck." Peg waved toward the green fields with one hand and toward the clouds with the other. It was dusk now, and just one star twinkled cheerily in the sky. "I'll set you down, but I'm not going away," said the Runaway Country determinedly. "And if that little old gnome doesn't turn up, I'm going to catch you all again." "Ozma never forgets. She'll keep her promise," said Peg. "And you must do just as she told you to do, for she has some powerful magic and can send you right back to where you came from." "Can she?" gulped the Country anxiously. "You might wait a while, though," suggested Pompa darkly. "After I've seen this new Princess, a Runaway Country might be a very good thing." "Well, you can't expect her to marry you if you talk that way," said Peg warningly, as the Country came to a stop in a huge field of daisies. "I'll wait," it said hopefully, as the four travelers swung themselves down. "I wonder if we are in the north central part," murmured Peg Amy, looking around anxiously. Now it happened the Country had crossed the Deadly Desert slantwise, and although none of the party knew it, they were scarcely a mile from Sun Top Mountain. "I see a garden!" cried Wag, twitching his nose hungrily. "Come on, Prince, let's find some supper." With head down and dragging his feet, Pompa followed Wag. Kabumpo began jerking snappishly at some tree tops, and Peg Amy sat down to think. "I wish," thought the Wooden Doll, looking up at the bright star, "I wish I might have asked the box one little question." Peg Amy looked so solemn that Kabumpo stopped eating and regarded her anxiously. "What's the matter?" asked the Elegant Elephant gruffly, for he quite counted on Peg's cheerfulness. "I was thinking about it again," admitted Peg apologetically. "About being alive before. I'm sure I was alive before I was a doll, Kabumpo. I think I was a person like Pompa," she continued softly. "You're much better as you are," said the Elegant Elephant uneasily, for it had just occurred to him that the magic mirror would tell Peg who she was as well as the question box. But should he let her look in it? That was the question. Poor tired old Kabumpo shifted from one foot to the other as he tried to make up his mind. 2 huge drops of perspiration ran down his trunk. What good would it do? He reasoned finally. Suppose it told something awful? It couldn't change her, and it might make her unhappy. No, he would not let Peg look in the mirror. "How would you like to have this pearl bracelet?" he asked in an embarrassed voice. "Why, Kabumpo, I just adore it!" cried Peg, springing up in a hurry. And I'm not going to worry about being alive any more, for everyone is so lovely to me I ought to be the happiest person in Oz." "You are," puffed Kabumpo, clumsily slipping the bracelet on Peg's wooden arm. "And if we ever get back to Pumperdink, you shall have as many silk dresses as you want, and—" The rest of the sentence was smothered in a hug. Peg Amy was growing fonder and fonder of pompous old Kabumpo, and by the time he had recovered his breath, Wag and the Prince came ambling back together. They had found an orchard and a kitchen garden, and as they were no longer hungry, both were more cheerful. "Let's play Scop Hotch," suggested Wag amiably. "I'm tired of hunting princesses." There was a smooth patch of sand under the trees, and Wag hopped over and began marking out the squares with his paw. "Scop Hotch!" laughed Pompa, while Peg gave a skip of delight. "Play if you want to," wheezed Kabumpo, shaking himself wearily. "I feel about as playful as a stone lion. Besides, hopscotch isn't an elephant game." Peg, Wag and Pompa began to hopscotch for dear life. Peg often tumbled over, for it is hard to keep your balance on wooden legs. But it was Peg who won in the end, and Wag crowned her with daisies. "I wish we could go on just as we are," gasped Pompa, mopping his face with his silk handkerchief. "We're all good chums, and if it weren't for Pumperdink's disappearing, we might travel all over Oz and have no end of adventures together." "Speaking of disappearing," said Kabumpo, opening one eye, for he had dozed off during the game, "I suppose we'd better be starting if we're to save the kingdom at all." "Goodbye to pleasure," sighed Pompa, as Kabumpo lifted him to his back. "Goodbye to everything." "Oh, cheer up," begged Peg, setting herself on Wag's back. "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" A large yellow bird rose suddenly from a nearby bush and flapped its wings over Pompa's head. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" "Shoo! Get away!" grumbled Kabumpo crossly. "What are you cheering about?" "She said to," cawed the bird, darting over Peg Amy's head. "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah! Let me teach you how to be cheerful in 3 chirps. First think of what you might have been. Next think of what you are. Then think of what you are going to be. Do you get it?" The bird put his head on one side and regarded them anxiously. "He might have been King of Oz, instead of which he is only a lost prince. And he's going to be married to a mountain top princess. Do you see anything cheerful about that?" demanded Kabumpo angrily. "Clear out. We'll do our own cheering." "Shall I go?" asked the Hurrah bird, looking very crestfallen and pointing its claw at Peg Amy. "Maybe you can tell us the way to Sun Top Mountain," said Peg politely. "You can see it from the other side of the hill," replied the Hurrah bird. "I'll give you a few hurrahs for luck. Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" "Oh, go away," grumbled Kabumpo. "Not till you look at my nest. Did you ever see a Hurrah bird's nest?" he chirped brightly. "Let's look at it," said Pompa, smiling in spite of himself. The Hurrah bird preened itself proudly as they peered through the bushes. Surely it had the gayest nest ever built, for it was woven of straw of many colors, and hung all over the nearby branches were small Oz flags. In the nest 3 little yellow chicks were growing up into hurrahs, and they chirped faintly at the visitors. "Remember," called the Father Hurrah as they bade him goodbye, "you can always be cheerful in 3 chirps if you think of what you might have been, what you are, and what you are going to be. Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" "There's something in what you said," chuckled Wag. "Goodbye." The moon had come up brightly, and even Kabumpo began to feel more like himself. "There's a lot to be learned by traveling, eh, Wag?" He winked at the rabbit who was just behind him. "Let's see. Somersaults for sums, never be gormish, and now how to be cheerful in 3 chirps. Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" The Elegant Elephant began to plow swiftly through the daisy field, so that in almost no time they reached the top of the little hill, and as they did so, Peg gave a little scream of delight. As for the others, they were simply speechless. A purple mountain rose steeply ahead, and set like a crown upon its summit was a glittering gold castle, the loveliest, laciest gold castle you could imagine, with 100 fluttering pennants. All down the mountainside spread its lovely gardens, its golden arbors, and flower-bordered paths. "I've seen it before!" cried the wooden doll softly, but no one heard her. Pompa drew a deep breath, for the castle, shimmering in the moonlight, seemed almost too beautiful to believe. "Woo-wee!" whistled Wag, breaking the silence. "The Princess of Tun Sop Wountain must be wonderful." "Shall we start up now?" gasped Kabumpo, swinging his trunk nervously. "I don't believe she'll ever marry me. Let's don't go at all," muttered the Prince of Pumperdink in a shaking voice. "Oh, come on!" called Wag, who was curious to see the owner of so grand a castle. "But we mustn't go, Wag," gasped Peg Amy. "How would it look to have a shabby old doll tagging along when he's trying to talk to the Princess?" "If Peg doesn't go, I'm not going," declared Pompa stubbornly. "You're just as good as any Princess," said Kabumpo, "and I'm not going without you either." As the Elegant Elephant refused to budge and there seemed no other way out of it, Peg Amy finally consented, and the four adventurers started fearfully up the winding path, almost expecting the castle to disappear before they reached the top. So unreal did it seem in the moonlight. There was no one in the garden, but there were lights in the castle windows. "Just as if they expected us," said the Elegant Elephant as they reached the tall gates. Pompa opened the gates and next instant they were standing before the great castle door. "Shall we knock?" chattered Wag, his eyes sticking out with excitement. "No, wait a minute," begged the Prince, who was becoming more agitated every minute. "Here's the mirror and the doorknob," quavered Kabumpo. "Didn't the question box say to trust them? Why, look here, Pompa, my boy, it fits." Clumsily, Kabumpo held up the glittering doorknob he had brought all the way from Pumperdink. Then he slipped it easily on the small gold bar projecting from the door. But instead of looking joyful, Pompa groaned dismally. He started to protest, but Kabumpo had already turned the knob, and they found themselves in a glittering gold courtroom. "Now for the Princess," puffed Kabumpo, looking around with his twinkling little eyes. "Here, take the mirror, Pompa." The room was empty, although brilliantly lighted, and the Prince stood uncertainly in the very center. Suddenly, with a determined little cry, Pompa rushed over to Peg Amy, who stood leaning against a tall gold chair. "Peg," choked Pompa, dropping on his knees beside the wooden doll, "I'll have to find some other way to save Pumperdink. I'm not going to marry this Princess and have you taken away from me. You're a proper enough Princess for me, and we'll just go back to Pumperdink and be—" "The mirror! Look in the mirror!" screamed Wag, who was sitting beside Peg Amy. Unconsciously, Pompa had held out the gold mirror and Peg, leaning over to listen, had looked directly into it. Above Peg's pleasant reflection in the mirror, they read these startling and important words: "This is Peg Amy, Princess of Sun Top Mountain." While Pompa stared with round eyes, the words faded out, and this new legend formed in the glass: "This is the proper Princess." "I always knew you were a Princess!" cried Wag, turning a somersault. The big rabbit had just come right side up when a still more amazing thing happened. The wooden body of Peg melted before their eyes, and in its place stood the loveliest little Princess in the world. And yet, with all her beauty, she was strangely like the old Peg. Her eyes had the same merry twinkle and her mouth the same pleasant curve. "Oh!" cried Princess Peg, holding her arms out to her friends. "Now I am the happiest person in Oz!" End of Chapter 20 Chapter 21 of Kabumpo and Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21. How It All Came About. Before Pompa had time to rise, a tall, richly clad old nobleman rushed into the room. "Peg!" cried the old gentleman, clasping the princess in his arms. "You are back! At last the enchantment is broken!" For a moment the two forgot all about Pompa and the others. Then, gently disengaging herself, Peg seized the prince's hand and drew him to his feet. "Uncle," she said breathlessly, holding to Pompa with one hand and waving with the other at Kabumpo and Wag, "here are the friends responsible for my release. This is my Uncle Tozzyfog," she explained quickly, and impulsively Uncle Tozzyfog sprang to his feet and embraced each in turn, even Kabumpo. "Sit down," begged the old gentleman, sinking into a golden chair and mopping his head with a flowered silk kerchief. Pompa, who could not take his eyes from this new and wonderful Peg Amy, dropped into another chair. Kabumpo leaned limply against a pillar, and Wag sat where he was, his nose twitching faster than ever, and his ears stuck out straight behind him. "You are probably wondering about the change in Peg," began Uncle Tozzyfog, as the Princess perched on the arm of his chair. "So I'll try to tell my part of the story. 3 years ago, an ugly old peddler climbed the path to Sun Top Mountain. He said his name was Glegg, and, forcing his way into the castle, he demanded the hand of my niece in marriage." Peg shuddered, and Uncle Tozzyfog blew his nose violently at the distressing memory. Then, speaking rapidly and pausing every few minutes to appeal to the Princess, he continued the story of Peg's enchantment. Naturally, the old peddler had been refused and thrown out of the castle. That night, as Uncle Tozzyfog prepared to carve the royal roast, there came an explosion, and when the courtiers had picked themselves up, Peg Amy was nowhere to be seen, and only a threatening scroll remained to explain the mystery. Glegg, who was really a powerful magician, infuriated by Uncle Tozzyfog's treatment, had changed the little princess into a tree. "Know ye," began the scroll, quite like the one that had spoiled Pompa's birthday, "know ye that unless ye Princess of Sun Top Mountain consents to wed J. Glegg, she shall remain a tree forever, or until two shall call and believe her to be a princess. J. G." The whole castle had been plunged into utmost gloom by this terrible happening, for Peg was the kindest, best loved little princess any kingdom could wish for. Lord Tozzyfog and nearly all the courtiers set out at once to search for the little tree, and for 2 years they wandered over Oz, addressing every hopeful tree as Princess, but never happening on the right one. Finally they returned in despair, and Sun Top Mountain, once the most cheerful kingdom in all Oz, had become the gloomiest. There was no singing, no dancing, no happiness of any kind. Even the flowers had drooped in the absence of their little mistress. "Why didn't you appeal to Ozma?" demanded Pompa at this point in the story. "Because in another scroll Glegg warned us that the day we told Ozma, Peg Amy would cease to even be a tree," explained Uncle Tozzyfog hoarsely. "Then how did she become a doll? Tell me that, Uncle Tozzyfog," gulped Wag, raising one paw. "She'll have to tell you that herself," confessed Peg's uncle, "for that's all the story I know." So here Peg took up the story herself. The morning after her transformation into a tree, Glegg had appeared and asked her again to marry him. "I was a little yellow tree in the Winkie Country, not far from the Emerald City," explained Peg. "And every day for 2 months Glegg appeared and gave me the power of speech long enough to answer his question. and each time he asked me to marry him, but I always said no." The Princess shook her yellow curls briskly. "One afternoon there came a one-legged sailor man and a little girl." Even Kabumpo shuddered as Peg Amy told how Cap'n Bill had cut down the little tree, pared off all the branches and carved from the trunk a small wooden doll for Trot. "It didn't hurt," Princess Peg hastened to explain as she caught Pompa's sorrowful expression, "and being a doll was a lot better than being a tree. I could not move or speak, but I knew what was going on, and life in Ozma's palace was cheerful and interesting. Only, of course, I longed to tell Ozma or Trot of my enchantment. I missed dear Uncle Tozzyfog and all the people of Sun Top Mountain. Then, as you all know, I was stolen by the old gnome, and after Ruggedo carried me underground, I forgot all about being a princess and remembered nothing of this." Peg glanced lovingly around the room. "I only felt that I had been alive before. So you—" Peg jumped up and flung one arm around Wag. "And you," she flung the other around Pompa, "saved me by calling me a princess and really believing I was one. And you," Peg hastened over to Kabumpo, who was rolling his eyes sadly, "you are the darlingest old elephant in Oz. See, I still have the necklace and bracelet." And sure enough, on Peg's round arm and white neck gleamed the jewels the Elegant Elephant had generously given when he thought her only a funny wooden doll. "Oh," groaned Kabumpo, "why didn't I let you look in the mirror before? No wonder you kept remembering things." "But why did Glegg send the threatening scroll to Pumperdink 3 years after he'd enchanted Peg?" asked Wag, scratching his head. "Because," shrilled a piercing voice, and in through the window bounded a perfectly dreadful old man. It was Glegg himself. "Because," screeched the wicked magician, advancing toward the little party with crooked finger, "when that meddling old sailor touched Peg with his knife, I lost all power over her. Because my question box told me that Pompadore of Pumperdink could bring about her disenchantment, and he has. I made it interesting for you, didn't I? There isn't another magician in Oz can put scrolls up in cakes and roasts like I can, nor mix magic like mine. Ha ha!" Glegg threw back his head and rocked with enjoyment. "You have had all the trouble, and I shall have all the reward." Everyone was so stunned by this terrible interruption that no one made a move as Glegg sprang toward Peg Amy. But before he had reached the Princess, there was a queer, sulphurous explosion, and the magician disappeared in a cloud of green smoke. They rubbed their eyes, and as the smoke cleared, they saw Trot, the little girl who had played with Peg Amy when she was a wooden doll. "Ozma," explained Trot breathlessly, for she had come on a fast wish. After following the adventures of Pompa and Peg in the magic mirror, and as the magician had tried to snatch the Princess, Ozma had transported him by means of her magic belt to the Emerald City and sent Trot to bring her best wishes to the whole party. "I'm sorry I didn't make you a prettier dress when you were my doll," said Trot, seizing Peg Amy's hand impulsively, "but you see I didn't know you were a princess." "But you guessed my name," said Peg softly. There were so many explanations to be made and so many things to wonder over and exclaim about that it seemed as if they could never stop talking. Uncle Tozzyfog rang all the bells in the castle tower and stepping out on a balcony told the people of Sun Top Mountain of the return of Princess Peg Amy. Then the servants were summoned and such a feast as only an Oz cook can prepare was started in the castle kitchen. The courtiers came hurrying back, for during Peg's absence Uncle Tozzyfog had lived alone in the castle. Yes, the courtiers came back, and the people of Sun Top Mountain poured into the castle in throngs and nearly overwhelmed the rescuers by the enthusiasm of their thanks. Kabumpo had never been so admired and complimented in his whole elegant life. As for Wag, his speech grew more mixed up every minute. At last, when the courtiers and Uncle Tozzyfog had run off to dress for the grand banquet, and after Trot had been magically recalled by Ozma to the Emerald City, the four who had gone through so many adventures together were left alone. "Well, how about Pumperdink, my boy?" chuckled Kabumpo with a wave of his trunk. "Are we going to let the old kingdom disappear or not?" "It is my duty to save my country," said Pompa loftily. Then, with a mischievous smile at Peg Amy, "Don't you think so, Princess?" Peg Amy looked merrily at the Elegant Elephant and then took Pompa's hand. "Yes, I do," said the Princess of Sun Top Mountain. "Then you will marry me?" asked Pompa, looking every inch a prince in spite of his singed head and torn clothes. "We must save Pumperdink, you know," sighed Peg softly. "Three cheers for the Princess of Pumperdink! May she be as happy as the day is short!" cried Wag in his impulsive way. Uncle Tozzyfog was as pleased as Wag when he heard the news, and Pompa, attired in a royal gold embroidered robe, was married to Peg Amy upon the spot with much pomp and magnificence. Never before was there such rejoicing, a merrier company or a happier bride. Kabumpo, arrayed in 2 gold curtains borrowed for the happy occasion, had never appeared more elegant, and Wag was everywhere at once and simply overwhelmed with attention. That same night a messenger was dispatched to Pumperdink to carry the good news, and the next morning Pompa and Peg set out for the Emerald City, the Princess riding proudly on Wag and Pompadore on Kabumpo. Knowing the whole four as you do now, you will believe me when I say that their journey was the merriest and most delightful ever recorded in the merry Kingdom of Oz. After a short visit with Ozma and another to the King and Queen of Pumperdink, they all returned to Sun Top Mountain, where they are living happily at this very minute. End of Chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Kabumpo in Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. Ruggedo's Last Rock. There are only a few more mysteries to clear up before we leave for a time the jolly Kingdom of Oz. Ruggedo, much shaken by his terrible experiences with Glegg's magic, confessed everything to Ozma on her return to the Emerald City. You can imagine the surprise of the little fairy ruler on learning how her palace had come to be impaled upon the spikes of the wicked old gnome's gray head. "He will never reform," said Tik-Tok mournfully as Ruggedo finished his recital. The bad little gnome assured Ozma that he had reformed and begged for another chance, but this time Ozma knew better, and putting on her magic belt, she whispered a few secret words. Then they all hurried over to the magic picture, for they knew that Ruggedo had been transported to a safe place at last. The picture showed the runaway country rushing along faster than an express train, and dancing up and down on its highest hill was the furious old King of the Gnomes. They watched until the country plunged joyfully into the Nonestic Ocean, and when it was almost in the middle, Ozma stopped it by the magic spinning process, and it became Ruggedo's Island. "Well," sighed Dorothy as they turned from the picture, "I guess that will be Ruggedo's last rock." "He's rocked in the cradle of the deep now," chuckled the Scarecrow, "and I hope it quiets him down. They ought to make a good pair, that bad little island and that bad little king," he added reflectively. Then Ozma proposed that they follow the adventures of Peg and Pompa, having so satisfactorily disposed of Ruggedo. How she transported Glegg just in time to save the Princess you already know. But what happened to Glegg himself is interesting. When the old magician had asked his question box how to regain control over Peg again, it had directed him to bury his mixed magic under the Emerald City and in 2 years to send the scroll to Pumperdink. So Glegg had tunneled out the cave under Ozma's palace and left his magic in what he supposed was a very safe place. It had been a great hardship to do without it for 2 years. But he wanted Peg so badly that he actually did this, never dreaming that Ruggedo had moved in and discovered his treasures. The question box had told the exact day Peg would be disenchanted, and all that long 2 years Glegg had waited, hidden in a forest near Sun Top Mountain. As he knew nothing of the discovery of his magic box, no one was more surprised than he to find himself, just as he was on the point of seizing Peg, transported to the Emerald City. While Sir Hokus of Pokes held the struggling Glegg, Ozma asked the question box how to deal with him. Everybody crowded around the little fairy ruler to hear what the wicked old magician's fate was to be. "Give him a taste of his own magic," directed the question box. "Make him drink a cup of his triple trick tea." This Ozma did, although it took 14 people to get Glegg to drink it. But stars! No sooner had the liquid touched his lips than the miserable old magician went off with a loud explosion. The box of mixed magic was carefully put away in Ozma's gold safe, and then the whole company, Ozma, Dorothy, Sir Hokus, the Scarecrow, and all the celebrities, devoted themselves to setting the topsy-turvy palace to rights, for they knew by the magic picture that Pompa and Peg Amy were coming to visit them. "Glegg, Glegg, shake a leg and never more, sir, bother Peg," shouted Scraps, as she swept up the black soot Glegg had left when he exploded. And he never did. End of Chapter 22. End of Kabumpo in Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. The reader of this book has been Phil Chenevert. In August of 2018.